Hi, welcome to Cubs and Culture for some time in the next couple of days. It's the 28th. Cubs magic numbers down to 2. We're up to Going With the Wind, 1939, which is the Best Picture winner. Going With the Wind is the first massive winner. It won. Okay, so it got 10 Oscars, but 2 of them were honorary. Technical ones. It won 8 competitive ones, and basically all the main ones. It's a very long movie. It's really the first epic that won Best Picture. I have very conflicted feelings about it. This movie is well crafted ugliness, very skillful, technically very skillful cinema, art, very skillful craftsmanship in service of something terrible. So this is actually going to be a little bit of a longer Cubs and Culture, because I got to talk about 2 other things. One I'll do right now, and then I got to bring up some clips. Okay, so there's the first thing is. Just to be absolutely clear about this, since this is apparently still a debate, the Civil War and the U.S. Civil War was about slavery. It was not 100% about slavery. There was also several other factors connected to international trade, and then also just unable to share powers. But the principal main thing that caused the Confederate States to succeed from the Union was the fact that the North was trying to at least limit the spread of slavery. And honestly, with the abolitionist movement and them not enforcing the Fugitive Slave Act in northern states, the South was pissed off about the North trying to take away their slaves. And this isn't really my opinion at all. This is so well known that it's the universal conclusion of all historians. But there's 2 things I want to mention right off the top of the bat. One was by the Confederate Vice President Stevens. It's known as the Cornerstone Speech or the Cornerstone Address, and it comes from this line, which I can bring up right now. The cornerstone of our peculiar institution, or African slavery, is the cornerstone upon which the Confederacy is built. So there's that, and that is the Vice President of the Confederacy saying that. He's saying basically all of the Old South was built on white supremacy. So there's that, and then the other thing is a lot of the declarations of secession, not always the first one, but often in the top 3, mention slavery as the main cause or one of the causes. South Carolina did that, as you can see here. But an increasing hostility on part of the non-slaveholding states to the institution of slavery has led to the disregard of their obligations. So that's really clear that what was pissing off the Confederacy was that the North was trying to take away their slaves. So obviously, even setting aside the issue of rebelling or whether or not they had a right to succeed in general, they were succeeding to own other people, which is one of the greatest evils on earth. So that's really important to always keep that in mind when talking about Going With the Wind. So that's the first thing, and then the other thing I want to talk about real quickly, and I'll bring up a trailer about this movie. There's another movie that's very, very important. It's not an Oscar movie because it came out in 1915, called Birth of a Nation, which Gone With the Wind is not really modeled on it, but it's has similar material in it, and it also has a similar problem. And in a weird way, Birth of a Nation bothers me a lot less than Gone With the Wind. So I'll be right back with some Birth of the Nation stuff. Okay, so Birth of a Nation was a film that came out in 1915, which, broadly speaking, it follows two families during Civil War and Reconstruction. So before the Civil War through Reconstruction. One Southern, one Northern, and it's sort of its main through line is that shot's really important. That's the Confederate soldiers marching back off to war. Well, not back off to war, but off to the Civil War. Anyways, the main sort of through line in the film is it's pretty blatantly, explicitly white supremacist and pro-Confederate. That shot I just showed you of them marching through the little town that they're in is repeated at the end with the Klan members, the Ku Klux Klan marching through. It's exactly the same shot, and there's a direct parallel. With that being said, as you can tell, with like it shows the assassination of Lincoln, etc., that the movie is pretty explicitly focused on the political situation, and because of that, and because it takes sort of the white supremacist line, its depictions of African Americans is absolutely horrible. Probably the most famous scene in the sequence in the film is a lynching where a black man who is portrayed completely as animalistic and brutal attempts to or rapes a white woman, and then the KKK tracks him down, lynches him, and this is portrayed as absolutely necessary, and which is all sort of disgustingly evil and everything like that. With all that being said, and this is not just my opinion, or it's well supported by critics and other evaluations of Birth of a Nation, the film technically, or how it's crafted, is absolutely revolutionary for its time, because it's the first film that had massive battle scenes and multiple coordinations, and then sort of the other main thing is it actually has the use of Technicolor. So some battle sequences are in red, others like nighttime scenes are in blue. The Southern family, if I'm remembering the film right, it tends to be in sepia tone. And the Northern family tends to be in green tone, which is absolutely wasn't done before. And with all that being said, the film still has sequences like this, which is, for my money, is the most racist sequence in the film, because this is supposed to be South Carolina or North Carolina, as I think South Carolina legislature after Reconstruction, and all these characters are in blackface, etc. And it's really disgustingly stereotypical racist depiction of African Americans, i.e. fried chicken, watermelon, being animalistic. Like, they have to vote, they have to keep your shoes on, which is, didn't actually happen. And then the clip ends with a sort of vote about interracial relationship, because they legalize interracial marriage, and it's like this horrible thing going in the movie, because there's a couple of white women who looks absolutely disgusted, and all the black house members sort of leer at them sexually, which is of course feeding into the stereotypes of black men being sexual predators, and that's all disgusting and everything like that. But again, the film Birth of a Nation cinematically is effective, and it's actually a very important film, because of not only the cinematic techniques were really used later on. Like, David Lean has admitted, David Lean's a major director of like Lawrence of Arabia. David Lean's admitted that he's been was slightly influenced by Birth of a Nation. But not only that, but the NAACP first came onto the scene. It wasn't founded because, but they led boycotts of Birth of a Nation, which obviously were not really effective. and everything like that. And so this movie has a very awful place in sort of cinematic history. So there's that, and I think this is a good touching point for Gone with the Wind. Okay, turning now to Gone with the Wind itself. The movie is, I'm going to show clips in the trailer in a moment, but the movie is very broadly similar to Birth of a Nation in terms of its overall structure. It starts slightly before the Civil War, and it goes to about 20 years after, during Reconstruction. And whereas Birth of a Nation is mostly interested in portraying sort of the Civil War and Reconstruction directly, Gone with the Wind mostly uses it as period backdrop or historical context or background, however you want to say it, for this really fucked up, turbulent romance between Scarlett O'Hara and Rhett Butler. And in some ways, neither character is a particularly empathetic. Sympathetic. In any case, Scarlett O'Hara, played wonderfully by Vivien Leigh, in a perfect performance, is especially a very manipulative, but headstrong woman. She reminds me. I looked into this briefly before making the video to see if she was if Margaret Marshall, who wrote the book Gone with the Wind, was influenced at all by Becky Sharp in Vanity Fair. But she's a very similar character, and she's not very sympathetic, and she's very, very manipulative. But in the same way, it's really easy to see where she's coming from. She's sort of, the main through line with Scarlett O'Hara is her. It's sort of a coming of age story, but it's her learning to be independent at every stage of her life, and to get what she wants. And then Rhett Butler is a little bit more sympathetic than O'Hara, but mostly because you don't spend a lot of time with him. He's still abusive and fucked up, and the relationship is totally fucked up. So there's that. That's sort of the main through line, that turbulent relationship. And then the other sort of main point of contention is there's this other character named Ashley Wilkes, which Scarlett O'Hara wants for her husband, and that's sort of her object of desire. In fact, the story is mostly framed as a love triangle with Scarlett really wanting Ashley, and Rhett keeps trying to convince her that they're not good for her, that she should be with him, while the Civil War and Reconstruction is happening behind him, and everything like that. And so, because of that structure, it's a very well done love triangle, especially since Ashley Wilkes isn't able to be with Scarlett O'Hara because he's too good. He's too decent for her. But the other thing is, he's married Melanie, who's very typically Southern, passive, submissive, typically feminine, stereotypically feminine, lady. Which acts as a nice sort of counterpoint. So, in terms of its writing and everything, Gone with the Wind is very well sort of plotted in terms of all the character motivations and every little bit, and it pretty much gets every beat you want in there. And the stuff I've been talking about with Birth of a Nation and with the race relations is much more background and filler and historical color. And so one of my big problems with this movie, there's going to be a scene at the end where I talk about this a little bit more directly, is it's not. I find it far more insidious and far harder to deal with. It's implicit racism and white supremacy than Birth of a Nation, because it's sort of in there by default, whereas Birth of a Nation is sort of a full frontal argument, propaganda-esque picture for this was the lost cause, the North was wrong, white supremacy, blah blah blah. The KKK was a good group restoring the Southern honor. That's what that's what Birth of a Nation is saying. This film, Gone with the Wind, more or less says that as well, except it's in the background. It's just sort of implicit within the text. It's not explicit. It's not said. It's just sort of insidiously, subtextually there. And probably the worst aspect about this, and I don't want to show the scene because there's no real reason to show the scene as far as this is concerned, but at least in Birth of a Nation's case, the Klan is identified as the Klan. It's not treated subtextually or allegorically or euphemisms. In Gone with the Wind, the Klan, there's one scene in which Scarlett is attacked by a black man and a white man. It's heavily implied that the white man is a Yankee, and her then husband and Ashley go to a political meeting to punish those who attacked her. The political meeting in the book is the Klan. In the movie, it's not named, which is deeply sort of disturbing because it's almost as if the filmmakers sort of realized what the text was saying and realized it was in sort of insidious white supremacy and racism, but they were aware enough to hide it and be more covert. So anyway, I'm going to bring up some clips, and I'm going to mostly talk about the cinematic, visual direction sort of stuff, because again, I like the story and the sort of turbulent romance. It's fascinating to me, and I think it's well written, but because of the sort of political milieu that this film is dealing with, it's hard to focus on that sort of stuff to me because I just find it so distasteful that this the racism and white supremacy. So give me a sec. Okay, so as a point of movie history, Selznick, who was the producer, should actually be considered the author of this film. Victor Fleming shot most of it, but there was 3 other directors involved. We think only 2 have been absolutely confirmed, and there's a third one that they're not entirely sure about. Anyway, Ashley's on the left, Scarlett is on the right. One of the things I really, 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 really like about this movie, cinematically, is with its Technicolor and then sort of its visual framing and everything. It has a great illustrated quality to it, where this is a feature of films I kind of wish would come back. Because of the technology and everything like that on backlot and stuff, they didn't really necessarily try to make films look realistic, as opposed to like visually pleasing. So there's shots in this movie where it's obviously on a set or inside when it's supposed to be outside, where the sky and everything, like right there in the background, for example. It's with matte paintings. It has a much more of like an illustrative, drawn quality to it, as opposed to a realistic, making the audience trying to believe where they believe they're actually seeing the action. And so I really like the aesthetic, visual quality of this film. Because it feels very, it's just gorgeous to look at, but 2, it has a very, very storybook or illustrative quality like that. That's what the shot I'm thinking of, where it's just visually striking, where it's more, it has it's realistic and you get swept up in the story, but it has a theatricality and a romance to the visuals that it feels very, very powerful and like a world unto itself. And because it's sort of a lost cause film, it really, that antique feel really helps the story. Now, this scene I'm showing for several reasons, because one, it's my favorite scene in the movie. He's basically threatening to hurt her because at this point they're married and she's been withholding sex and a whole bunch of other stuff. It's a fucked up relationship, and he's basically saying, I could crush your head if you don't come to me. And it's, in these two characters, it's a love story. I mean, this movie is a love story between them, and in this sequence it basically ends with him sexually assaulting her. Sort of, again, it's fucked up, because in the morning she seems to have been okay with it. But one of the things I really like about this scene and sort of the performance of Vivien Leigh is she doesn't, because she's a headstrong and determined female character, a very strong woman, that she doesn't just kowtow him, she actually stands up to him. And then also the way in which it's shot with the use of shadows and everything really, really give a great sinister mood and scary. I mean, it's not film noir because of its time period and everything like that, but you can see how some of the film noir stuff was vaguely influenced by this stuff. And there's specifically one shot where she's going to be going up the stairs in a second, and then because of the nature of the scene, they're both going to going into shadow, which is a really great bit of visual direction. Because this, I mean, it is a horrifying situation. It can be read as a rape scene. Though I don't think, I mean, again, the relationship is so fucked up, it's hard to see. That's what I meant by the shadow. It's such a sinister, moving, striking scene. And then the other sort of thing visually with this film, so this is during the evacuation of Atlanta when General Sherman was coming. This film to this day is still one of the biggest films in terms of the number of people involved in certain shots, and this is probably the most famous shot in the film. So you really get this intimacy of her, because it starts with like a close-up, then slowly pulls back, and you keep seeing more and more soldiers and Confederates getting, and you just sort of get swamped by the scale here, which again, for a sort of epic movie, is a really good thing. But this is what I mean by sort of the insidious nature of it, this film's racism and white supremacy, is they could have ended the shot before you see the Confederate flag, which is coming up in a second. But by not ending the shot with the Confederate flag, it ends up glorifying it much more so, because like we're still standing. And then also with the shot, notice how the shadows in the background give it like a drawn quality to the shot, which you don't get enough anymore. Likewise, this scene, which is the first act climax, is she's come back to Tara and she's determined never to be hungry again. She gets sick here and everything like that. It's very striking, and now she's inside, and it's not, the compositional work is not perfect, because you don't fully believe, like you can tell that she's inside, or it really seems like it's inside, or the background image isn't doesn't have a fully realistic look to it, but it is visually beautiful and striking, and it really seems to capture her mood of, this seems like she's about to fall and have a sunset, but you actually then, because of her standing up, and then the light behind her gets lighter with this, even though technically, even when in the context of the story it's a sunset, it's actually a sunrise, because this is her finally standing up and taking care of herself, and she's vowing never to be hungry again. And then you have this great pullback shot to go into the intermission. Here's the pullback shot, which really is striking, and it stays with you, and everything like that. They actually won 2 Oscars for shots like this and for the use of color. Now, all of this cinematic in skill with the acting and the writing and everything like that is all in sort of service of this turbulent love relationship that is implicitly pro-Jim Crow and lost cause mythology, which is really disgusting ideologically. And I think the best way to sort of describe this tension is not her, that's Prissy. The maid on the right, her name is in the film Mammy. If you heard of the Mammy stereotype, it comes from mostly this character, but this woman, Hattie McDaniel is her name. This is basically the same character she played in every single film, basically the sassy black maid servant. And the thing is, McDaniel was actually won an Oscar for this performance. And it's not hard to see why, because, and this is what I sort of mean by well-crafted ugliness. If you're talking about Mammy as a character, she actually, and this scene is a good example, which is why I'm showing it, because she ends up getting into a little bit of a spat here, and she sort of wins by having Scarlett O'Hara eat when O'Hara doesn't, and that's basically what the scene about. And she has agency and everything like that, and she has a sort of amount of dignity, and so it's sort of, if not ignoring but acknowledging that it's a racial stereotype or a racial caricature. Hattie McDaniel here is giving throughout the entire film gives a 360-degree fully alive performance, and the character has agency and dignity, which you don't normally get with this caricature. So it feels much more believable, and it's much easier to buy into the caricature. But at the same time, this is what the caricature is named after, is this character. And so that's really the sort of the tension of this movie. If you just ignore what the text is trying to say politically or ideologically, it's a really lavish romantic film. The problem with it is it keeps it, because it is pro-Confederate, because it is a lost mythology film, it ends up just being disgusting. And so, like, I love McDonald's performance as Mammy, but at the same time, it is a racial caricature. Okay, so that's going to be it for Cubs and Culture. Have a good day. I feel like I was getting ranty. Okay, goodbye.